Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the stream. It's Danny Dhaiphong, your host. It's a very special live stream today because we have hit 100,000 subscribers here. And so we're going to do a lot of celebrating today, as well as talking about the news, at least some of the more pertinent stories for you geopolitically. But you know what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, especially hit that like button, though. Help boost this stream in the algorithm as you're coming on. Of course, subscribe to the channel. And there are many ways to support. There is many links in the video description. The reason why I'm so late, believe me, I do not like being this late. But the reason why I'm late is because as you can see, I don't have my general mic set up. So I do need a sound check because I'm using my lavalier mic. I don't usually use this that often. So please do give me a sound check. How do I sound? How's the volume? I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do about the volume on this, but please do give me a sound check. All right. And yes, I think my audio interface actually is gone. Thanks so much. I hope I sound okay. Needs more low end. Not sure what that means. Sounds 5 volume. Okay. 5 of 5. Okay. It's going to be kind of what it is. All right. I have not been able, I didn't have time to test. All right. But welcome, everybody. This is what I got today. All right. And, disaster strikes even in moments of celebration. So yes, 100,000 subscribers. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to everyone watching. Thanks to all the YouTube viewers out there, everyone who's watching here, everyone who couldn't make the stream. You all make this possible. Your interest in what I talk about make this possible. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this achievement, which honestly, I never thought I would be here. It's taken a whole lot of work. A lot of it solo, but not all of it solo. There's a lot, actually, of help that I've received. Very generous support and help. And I'm definitely going to, at the end, shout out those folks. And there's a lot to get to, and I'll probably miss quite a number of people. Well, with that said, everybody, so here's how today is going to work, okay? So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a few stories because there are a few stories that need to be gotten to, especially with what has just happened in Canada. Oh, Canada! Oh, Canada! I'm going to get into that with all of you, and then I'm also going to talk about the situation in Ukraine a bit, as the neocons, the Nato foreign policy establishment, the U.S. foreign policy establishment, they are all gearing up for a long war in Ukraine, mainly because Ukraine has no chance of anything else, cannot sustain anything but a long war, and it is quite unclear whether that is even sustainable. But that's what I will get to. Okay, those are the stories, and then I'm going to do an ask me anything. I'll take super chats. I don't think I saw any Patreon subscribers leave any comments, but I will take as many questions as I can toward the end. But you know what to do, everybody. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. The like button helps boost the stream and the algorithm. And it looks like of all the days that I right before I went to stream, what ended up happening was my audio system, probably my audio interface, is done. It's flashing. It's not connecting to my computer system. So lo and behold, I'm using a different microphone. All right. Someone said my shirt is buttoned wrong. That is probably true. Actually, it is. It is. I'm actually gonna just unbutton this. And fix this while I'm on air. Don't look, everybody, because all right, there we go. There we go. All right, I'm a hot mess right now. I'm a hot mess. It looks like my shirt is buttoned wrong. Let me fix this because I was rushing. All right. So stay tuned, okay? Stay tuned. I'm gonna be right back. All right, because I definitely gotta fix myself up here. This is ridiculous. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, everyone. I'm back. All right, everybody, hit that like button. Let's get celebrating, okay? Hit that like button, share. I had to fix myself up. It's ridiculous to be looking the way I did. But I was rushing around. Let's get started, okay? Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. All right. We've got a lot to get to, all right? We've got a lot to get to. All right, everybody. All right. I probably didn't even fix this correctly, honestly. I'm a mess. Definitely. Definitely. But let's leave it. Let's leave it. Let's leave it. People will just have to this is crazy. This is crazy. All right, everybody. All right. This is what life is like in the down under. All right. You have to put up with it. All right. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. Let's get started. Actually, this is distracting the hell out of me. Let everybody give me a this is funny. This is funny. All right. Let's just do this, okay? So hit that like button, like the stream, like the stream, like the stream, and we'll get started here. All right. And of course, to help with the audio system, to help me get some better shirts too, please do subscribe to the channel on Patreon, patreon.com/DannyHaiFong, patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. And you can also support this channel in so many other ways. Substack, you can do it on YouTube, buy me a coffee, etc. All right. All right. So let's get to the stories, okay? Because I want to talk about the Canada situation. But before I do, I'm actually going to fix this shirt. All right. So let me do that. We're going to talk about the Canadian Nazi situation right after this because I am a little OCD. So let me do that. Okay. I'll be right back. All right, I think I'm good. I think I'm good, everybody. I think I'm good. This is ridiculous. Sorry for all of that. Sorry for the mess. I was having an audio emergency. Literally, my system broke down. I had changed really, really fast because I was actually working, wearing a different outfit while I was working. I actually work in a little bit more casual than this. So we are good to go now. So now we are going to actually celebrate, and we're going to do that in style. Now the shirt is fixed, and I hope I sound good. I hope I look good now. I'll be sure for everyone who's tuning in now, you can just fast forward through all of that. I'll have a timestamp later for those who catch the replay. In any event, let's get started, okay? Because we have a lot to get to, including the celebratory aspect of this, okay? All right, so let's get to it. How do we begin? All right. All right, here we go. So the weekend of September 22nd to 24th was actually quite an embarrassing one for Canada. Now, I haven't talked much about Canada on this program, but it's safe to say that Canada, similar to Europe, is simply a vassal of the United States. This has been the case for many decades, especially over the last 40 years, where Canada has essentially made itself an appendage of the US foreign policy establishment, of the neocons. Canada has gone along with every US war. You name the war, and Canada has been aiding all along. Canada is a staunch member of NATO, and now, in this era of the Ukraine proxy war, led by the United States, provoked by NATO, Canada has played an instrumental role. But it was an embarrassing weekend for Canada because the Canadian Parliament did something that I think not many people were expecting. So Volodymyr Zelensky was visiting Canada, is making a tour around the collective West after his UN General Assembly debacle. And during this period, during his visit to Canada, there was a parliament meeting, and that meeting included a celebration of an out-and-out fascist of the SS Waffen. Yes, indeed, this happened. Canada was celebrating not a neo-NAZI, but an actual NAZI. And here is the story of Canada's embarrassment. Oh, Canada, oh, Canada. A Nazi-linked veteran received an ovation during Zelensky's Canada visit. The House Speaker apologizes for leading a tribute in Parliament. This initiative was entirely of my own. That's a lie, and I'm going to show you in a bit. But the report says that a ranking Canadian parliamentarian is apologizing to Jewish communities around the world for a blunder during Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's visit that led lawmakers honoring a veteran belonging to a Nazi division in World War II. It followed demands by Canadian Jewish organizations Sunday for an apology after it was revealed members of parliament across party lines awarded a 98-year-old veteran on Friday with a standing ovation after Zelensky addressed Canada's House of Commons. Yaroslav Hunka stood and appeared to salute from the public gallery when he was recognized by House Speaker Anthony Rota, who introduced Hunka as a Canadian-Ukrainian war hero from his political district. We have in the chamber today a Ukrainian-Canadian veteran from the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at the age of 98, said Rota on Friday, followed by a lengthy round of applause and a wave by Zelensky. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you. And there's Jewish groups who opposed it. Of course, these are Zionist groups, the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, the B'nai B'rith. These are Zionist groups. But nonetheless, the point is clear. And I want to pull up DD Geopolitics, and I want to give them a shout out, first of all, not just for this incredible tweet that I'm going to show you that actually demonstrates this celebration, but also for all of their support of my work. The thumbnails that you see, there are folks over at DD Geopolitics who are helping out with that. And so I have to just give them a quick shout out before I show you their coverage of this, which I found actually, and we're going to see the video now because Politico was not trying to show you the video of this embarrassing situation. So here is the report, okay? So listen to this reporter commenting on Zelensky's visit to Canada. Then listen again, and something will feel a little off. That's because she says the veteran receiving the standing ovation fought against the Russians in the Second World War. Yes, because the 98-year-old veteran is Yaroslav Hunka, who fought for the 14th Division of Waffen-SS. So let's have a...
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War. Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen.
So fought against the Russians, they say. That's what Canadian media, mainstream media, had to say about this. And yes, of course, fought against the Russians, yes. Fought against the Soviet Union, yes, because the NAZIs were fighting against the Russians for their fascist project. And Yaroslav Hunka was a part of the 14th Division of the Waffen-SS, which in this case was the Ukrainian division of the Nazi regime. So here, DD Geopolitics continues, the plot thickens. Turns out he is also one of the contributors to this book, Canada Going Full Bandera Stand 2.0, and he was a contributor to the history of the Galician division of the Waffen-SS. And so, and then you can see here, Yaroslav Hunka was a contributor to this book. And we go on and on and on to show kind of Canada, how Canada has been a supporter of fascism for quite some time, and even into today, where they still have in a monument here, the cenotaph at the Vladimir Ukrainian Cemetery in Oakville, Ontario, is flanked by flags and set on a small paved plateau. Few Canadians may be aware that this memorial commemorates a major battle fought by the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, a unit formed in 1943 and made up mostly of Ukrainian volunteers that fought against the Soviet Red Army during the Second World War. And so here are images of this division that Yaroslav Hunka was a part of. And these are just photographs, okay, that were shared during his time there, okay? these were the beautiful photos shared, okay? And here's, of course, the celebration that Zelensky putting his fist up in solidarity with the NAZIs. This is something we've been talking about on this channel for quite some time. All right, so Canada is no stranger harboring NAZI war criminals that they conveniently call displaced persons. Why did Canada go out of their way to take 2,000 Ukrainian NAZIs that were being screened by Britain? Canada has always been at war with Russia. And here's an excerpt about Operation Paperclip, which was a CIA operation, and Canada was a willing participant, okay? Also note that Stepan Bandera's grandson, Stephen Bandera, is a Canadian journalist and producer who has covered the conflict at length. While he admires and speaks on behalf of his grandfather, he cannot tell you what his grandfather thought of the Jews. And here you have a quote from him. Bandera said he was unable to tell firsthand experience what his grandfather thought about Jews. However, he told Jewish Telegraph Agency, in the quote anti-Soviet activism of my dad, there are a lot of Jewish colleagues and allies, and his father made an effort reaching out, working together with Jews that were on the same page, essentially Zelensky's, right? If you were like Vladimir Zelensky, then you were a good Jewish person. You were a fascist who would fight against the Soviets. So this is who Canada was celebrating. But it gets worse, okay? It gets worse because that lays out just what Canada, Trudeau, Anthony Rota, they're trying to say it was all Rota, nobody knew. And here's a report, okay, from The Guardian. Says Canada's House Speaker apologized after praising Ukrainian veteran of a Nazi unit. Jewish groups voiced anger over a standing ovation for Yaroslav Hunka, 98, after Volodymyr Zelensky's speech in Canada's parliament. Canada has become embroiled in escalating political controversy after members of its House of Commons were encouraged to join in a standing ovation for an individual who fought in Ukraine with a Nazi military unit accused of war crimes during the Second World War. The ovation took place shortly after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky delivered an address to the parliament on Friday, when the Assembly Speaker Anthony Rota called lawmakers' attention to 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, whom he described as a war hero who fought for the 1st Ukrainian Division. Images from the parliament show Zelensky and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau standing and applauding Hunka, and that was condemned by Jewish groups. As lawmakers cheered, Zelensky raised his fist in acknowledgement of Hunka and saluted from the gallery during 2 separate standing ovations, okay? And so Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the episode was clearly unacceptable, adding that it was deeply embarrassing for the Parliament of Canada and by extension to all Canadians. So the 1st Ukrainian Division was better known as Waffen-SS Galakia Division, or the SS 14th Waffen Division, a volunteer unit that was under the command of the Nazis. The decision to allow 600 members of the division to live in Canada after the Second World War has long been a source of controversy in Canada, and that was the subject of a government commission of inquiry in the 1980s onto whether Canada had become a haven for war criminals. Members of the division were accused of killing Polish and Jewish civilians. The Nuremberg tribunals found the Waffen-SS guilty as an organization of war crimes, but not the Galakia division. So they were basically apologized for. They were protected. That's how that should be seen. They were protected, and the United States and Canada and Western countries had a huge role in that. So I want to show you how embarrassing this really is, because as they were trying to deny that this was a government decision, right? They're trying to say that it was just Rota who didn't know, right? That this was some kind of freak accident that they had no control over. Well, DD Geopolitics once again bursts this bubble. Well, this is awkward. The Speaker of the Canadian Parliament barely had time to take full responsibility for inviting SS veteran Yaroslav Hunka, saying Trudeau and Zelensky had nothing to do with it. When reporters found a Friday post from the granddaughter, actually, it's the daughter-in-law of the Nazi Teresa Hunka. Dato is waiting in the reception hall for Trudeau and Zelensky, the caption says. It would seem that these two not only applauded him in the parliament, but also had a personal meeting with him. And here is the Facebook post, which was deleted the same day, showing him waiting for Zelensky and Trudeau. And here's the post here, Teresa Hunka. Dato is waiting in the reception hall for Trudeau and Zelensky. He is so delighted to be there. Most kind of Anthony Rota to do this. But of course, we know that if Zelensky and Trudeau were going to meet, well, then that means obviously that there was more to this than just Rhoda accidentally making an oopsie. Okay. Oh, Canada. Oh, Canada. This is not just an embarrassment, but it is part and parcel of a larger problem that has afflicted the collective West since the end of World War II, and that has played a huge role in the Ukraine proxy war, which is the love affair between the United States and its collective West vassals with out and out fascists. This love affair is one of convenience. It's also one of alignment politically, militarily, economically, and it is also one that is driving the conflict in Ukraine, because these are the forces militarily, these are the forces politically that are in control. I don't care about if there's a number discrepancy, and you can't put a number on the broad swath of how many people exactly are NAZIs in Ukraine. The point is that they are the driving ideological, military, and political force. Their anti-Russia, their hatred of Russia, their service, their political influence is outsized. And that has been the case since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. But this has been a problem that the United States and the collective West have been nurturing for so long as one of political convenience since the Cold War. This is a reality. This is part of history. The United States in the West, they wanted to attack the Soviet Union 4 years after the end of World War II. The atom bomb was to scare the Soviet Union and show the Soviet Union the US's military superiority through this bomb. So it is no wonder that anti-Soviet, anti-Russian forces like the NAZIs were convenient to use in their research, in their political programs, in intelligence, and the like. And that has been a reality for many decades, over 70 years now. So I want to show you what Brian Berletic had to say about this. A friend of the show, he will certainly be back on in early October, but I want to show you what he had to say about this, because I think he had some good insights, and then we will continue from there. So here we go.
Let's talk about what happened in the Canadian Parliament. So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Canada. He gave a speech in front of Canada's Parliament, and then the Speaker of the Parliament had his own comments to make. And as he was talking about World War II, he introduced a World War II veteran, who he himself said fought the Russians. He's a Ukrainian who fought the Russians in World War II, which means he is a Nazi, very clearly. If you know nothing else about World War II, let's look at Wikipedia. If you know nothing else about World War II, and you just glance at Wikipedia's entry on World War II, you read nothing of the actual article. Forget that. You could spend hours and hours reading all of that. If you just looked at this right here, this basic summary of World War II, and you go down to participants, if you didn't already know this, you see who the main Allied leaders were. It includes Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, which includes Russia, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, who the Canadian head of parliament actually mentioned and was talking about. And they were fighting against the Axis, which included Adolf Hitler of Nazi Germany, Emperor Hirohito of the Empire of Japan, and Benito Mussolini of Italy. This was the Axis. These were the allies. So if you were fighting against Russia, it meant you had to be at least one of these. And it turned out that this Ukrainian veteran that they then all gave a standing ovation to, turned out that he was actually a Nazi, a literal Nazi, who at one point had to do the Hail Hitler salute to actual Adolf Hitler when he was still alive, either in principle or in person. And I want you to watch the segment of this event hosting Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. I want you to watch it, see it, and hear it for yourself to truly appreciate what just took place in the Canadian Parliament. And again, it wasn't as if the head of the Canadian Parliament thought that he was a World War II vet who fought the Nazis, and then it turned out later he was a Nazi. He himself introduced him as someone who fought the Russians, which meant he had to have been a Nazi. Let's listen.
Your words today also remind us of another world leader who addressed both our houses during the time of war. In December 1941, during World War II, the British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, traveled to Ottawa and delivered an impassioned speech on behalf of his people to rally for the continued support for his country at war. It was a defining moment of history and one that must never be forgotten. We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
So you're telling me that nobody in Canada's parliament, including Justin Trudeau, knew who this guy actually was, and now we know that Trudeau met with him beforehand? This shows how so-called neoliberals, neocons, how they are not different from fascists. They are not apart from fascists. They are not better than fascists. They are not somehow distinguishable from Nazis, from Nazis, that they are inseparably linked. Look at that ovation. Listen to this ovation. I mean, it's going and on and on, and it is continuing on. Listen to that ovation. That is exactly what we all need to see. We need to see that, and that's why that's why the public relations sphere, the Western mainstream media, they are going crazy about this because it exposes a dirty little secret that is actually not so secret anymore.
His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
Do you see how happy they are? I mean, look, I don't know who this person is. I don't know much about Canadian politics, but even just look how happy look, they are so happy that this is going on. And as Brian said, you don't even have to know much about World War II. You don't have to know much about World War II. I would say that probably most people in Canada, most people in the collective West don't know much about World War II. But if you have even if you just listened in history class when you were in school, or if you went on Wikipedia like Brian Berletic did, you can at least see who was on each side. And if you look at who was on the so-called Axis side, if you look at who, well, let's say who was against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Unions were on the Allied side, mind you. If you look at that, then you know that that whole chunk was considered in the fascist camp. whether you're talking about Japanese fascism or you're talking about Nazism. So the fact that they are so happy and they're clapping and they're celebrating so publicly just goes to show what was always the truth. It's a mask-off moment. It is just demonstrative of how the collective West doesn't just collaborate with fascism. The collective West is the seeds of fascism. And if you know anything about what led up to the events that led up to World War II, you know the collective West was actually helping support and wanted, as long as Nazism, as long as Hitler, as long as these far-right Nazi, Nazi fascist forces across the world were not affecting them, it was okay. And that's why a lot of big monopolists, corporatists, capitalists, that's why they supported Hitler's cause for a very long time, up until he started to bring the war to Western Europe. So let's continue.
And then following this section of the speech, he then began lecturing everyone in the Canadian Parliament about Western democracy. And let's be honest, genuine democracy requires an informed electorate. And if the head of the Canadian Parliament is this profoundly ignorant about something like World War II, who the participants were, and he, accidentally invited a literal Nazi into the Canadian Parliament and gave him a standing ovation, what does that tell you about the intellectual capacity of Western leaders right now in the West? And we keep hearing about how Nazis in Ukraine is a Russian propaganda talking point. If you mention this, if you bring this up, you're just repeating Russian propaganda. But we keep seeing these accidents happening over and over again. When the Western media goes into Ukrainian-held territory, they take videos or pictures of Ukrainian soldiers and they're covered in Nazi symbols. And now, what's the chance that you invite a World War II veteran to the Canadian Parliament? It turned out he was an actual Nazi. I mean, what are the chances of that happening accidentally? Unless Ukraine has a serious Nazi problem. And the other thing we always hear is that Ukraine cannot possibly have a Nazi problem because their president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is Jewish. Well, let's watch the video again and see what Jewish president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, did when the Canadian head of parliament introduced a World War II veteran who was fighting the Russians. Let's see what his reaction was. Standing and clapping for a literal Nazi.
I want to stop it there in order to elaborate on the point that Brian is making here. Because not only did he, that because the video was quite blurry, it almost looked like a Heil signal, mind you. But of course, we saw the pictures earlier of the fist as well go up. Regardless if it's a fist or a Heil or whatever, it still shows Zelensky is very much in solidarity with fascists and with Nazis. I mean, that's been the case since the beginning of this conflict. It's been quite clear that that was the case. And, given that Ukraine's military is heavily reliant on the spirit, the energy, and the leadership of Azov and forces like it, well, that's just the reality. That's how this conflict has been fought since the beginning. But this is a problem that was acknowledged by the collective West in Ukraine for quite a long time. As Brian said, that, this all indicates, and we're always told that we are agents of Russia if we are pointing out that Ukraine has a problem when it comes to fascism, when it comes to Nazis, when it comes to Nazism and neo-Nazism. We're called the Putin puppets, that we are on the side of Russia. But the reality is that the collective West themselves was saying this. And I always like to pull this up. They were saying this for years, since the 2014 coup especially, but not even exclusively. Let me pull up this. Western media before February 2022. These are not all the headlines, but many of the headlines that are saying and indicating and talking about and analyzing and proving that Ukraine indeed has a problem with Nazism. In that, I mean, this is historic in nature. The Bandera movement, the Banderites, these forces didn't necessarily go away. In fact, the collective West has empowered them since the end of World War II. They've empowered them to, at the very least, remain politically relevant in order to fight a Cold War, first against the Soviet Union and now against the Russian Federation via the Ukraine proxy war. And look at these headlines. I mean, the Times of Israel, Ukraine celebrates Nazi collaborator, bans books critical of pogrom's leaders. Here you have a 2014 article, far-right fighters from Europe fight for Ukraine. Here you have a Haaretz article from 2018, Ukraine designates national holiday to commemorate Nazi collaborator. Here you have an article from 2018, Bretons join neo-Nazi militia in Ukraine. The Atlantic Council, Ukraine's got a real problem with far-right violence. And no, RT didn't write this headline. That was the Atlantic Council in 2018, NATO's think tank. Here you have Bellingcat. Yes, it's still okay to call Ukraine C-14 neo-Nazi. That's from 2019. So on and on. BBC, Ukraine underplays role of far-right in the conflict. So again, this is all mainstream Western media. This has been a truth, a reality that even the collective West has acknowledged. But after 2014, after 2022 of February, all of that went away. Talking about this issue, bringing it up is enough to get you labeled simply a Russian puppet, smeared, and you can be censored, you can be demonetized, whatever it is. But nonetheless, the facts are the facts, and the facts haven't changed just because the collective West wants to exploit, wants to empower these forces against Russia because it's really all they have in terms of skill and energy. I mean, these are forces with battlefield experience, obviously. They were the ones trying to defeat the Allied forces, in large part led by the Soviet Union, although, of course, many in the collective West don't want to hear this. So this was a real embarrassing moment for Canada. Obviously, Canada has a real problem with this, harboring these kinds of forces, but it, of course, is much bigger than that. This is really, when you talk about Canada, you cannot talk about Canada without talking about the United States. The United States essentially operates Canadian foreign policy. It has been doing so for many, 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 many decades. There really isn't any conflict there. And that's because the United States has wielded its influence as the so-called superpower over its collective West so-called allies in order to get what it wants. And here in Ukraine, what the United States has wanted from the very beginning is to defeat Russia by any means necessary. And so what are some of those means? Well, some of those means are empowering and supplying, funding, and arming the most despicable and heinous war criminals on the face of this earth that stem from the scourge of Nazism. That has been the truth from the very beginning, no matter how much it is censored, how much it is decried, rejected by the ruling elites, by the neocons in the collective West, by all those who seek to promote outright lies, to whitewash these kind of forces in order to stick a needle or slam a hammer on the back of the Russian bear. No matter how much they try to do this, it cannot be hidden. And this was a mask-off moment when it comes to Canada's role. Of course, it's happening across the collective West. The United States is trying its best to distance itself from the worst of this and has the ability through its hegemonic position in this collective West imperial sphere to distance itself, despite the fact that it is the main arbiter, it is the agent fueling these forces at the moment. But when it comes to Europe, when it comes to Canada, they have taken the attack dog role. And so this, as part of Trudeau's legacy, and Trudeau has a very checkered history now, right? Trudeau just is now having problems with India for trying to treat India like some kind of colony that should be brought to heel based on this whole Sikh assassination issue, right? Going after India, obviously, for its role in BRICS and it's saying that, oh, it has Five Eyes intelligence that there was an assassination that India conducted, and now it should be punished for that. It should be held accountable. These are the words not of an independent government or foreign policy. These are the words of a mouthpiece for U.S. foreign policy, a foreign policy that is heavily reliant on the worst of the worst, the most criminal, the most fascistic, the most outright fascist forces. This is a long-standing foreign policy that is all about, I mean, this is how it's been, and this is why U.S. empire, this is why the U.S. foreign policy establishment, the neocons, the neoliberals, these forces are so dangerous, is because they will do anything they can to ensure the defeat of Russia, to ensure the defeat of China, to somehow win in their fantasies going on in their minds this war that they are building against both, and they will use any means to do so, including empowering the worst of the worst, potentially to the point where these forces once again take leadership. Ukraine is an example of how that actually could happen because they did. There's holidays celebrating them. There's street signs that have been changed. There are far-right, outright fascist political parties with influence in parliament. And of course, on the military front, they are the most energetic, the most influential, and the most important within Ukraine's National Guard, its battalions, etc. Azov has been the burning spear of what has been, of course, a complete and utter failure of this Ukraine proxy war. But they have been at the front lines. They have been the ones who have been bearing the brunt of the fighting. They're the ones who actually bring the energy. They have fighting experience. And that is why Russia says denazification. This is a good example that affirms Russia. It's these kind of moves that again show how bankrupt the collective West is in Ukraine. And I'm guessing that we're going to see more of this in the very near future. So that's the end of the first story, everybody. That's the end of the first story, okay? I just want to cover that. I'm going to get to one more, and then we'll get to the celebration part. While you're here, of course, hit that like button, hit that notifications bell. First, hit that like button. We have 760 likes or so, 1,500 viewers. So it's about a 1-to-2 ratio. That's okay. But let's try to get up to 1,000 likes and boost this stream even further in the algorithm. Thank you so much. Of course, subscribe if you're new. We're celebrating 100,000 subscribers here, but of course, more subscribers always helps to bring this channel to more and more people. And if you hit the notifications bell, you are hopefully going to get notified on when I go live, when I post clips, etc. And furthermore, I think, given the lateness of this stream and all of that was due to, unfortunately, my audio system is likely gone. Please do support this channel to ensure that these costs are able to be met. I'm going to Vietnam in about 2.5 weeks, actually, and I will be doing some, hopefully some good videos and reporting from out there, talking about not just what's going on in the world in the news, as I usually do on these streams, but also giving you some flavor of what Vietnam's perspective is, Vietnam's history, all of that, through talking to delegates and people out there. So you can do that at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. Patreon.com/DannyHaiphong is the best place to support this work. And of course, there's other really great places to support. YouTube membership. Welcome to all the YouTube members. You can also support via Buy Me a Coffee, Substack paid membership. And of course, do hit up Substack for free. Do hit up Telegram for free in the link tree in the video description, because you get notified there of all of my streams. So that's a great thing to do as well. All right, everybody. We have 1,400 viewers. Where are you all going? Don't leave. We have a lot of celebrating to do, but I have one more story. All right. And yes, I did have a wardrobe malfunction before I got here. It was, one of those things that happens when you're rushing and moving through crisis. A tech crisis. Tech crises always get me all, especially when I'm about to go live. They tend to happen at that time. It's a great time. Okay, here we go. Next story, all right? Let's see. Ukraine has entered a long war, and this is now being admitted by the collective West. But it's more than just a long war that is the problem here. The problem here is that the war is not winnable. And this is becoming also increasingly clear through the way that the Western mainstream media is talking about Ukraine, talking about its counteroffensive. There are incredible divides that are being had and that are shaping up as the counteroffensive essentially ends. That's what has happened. The counteroffensive has essentially ended. It is slowing down. The weather is about to turn very poor for battle, but even more so, everything that Ukraine attempted to fire on Russia has not moved the needle at all. And so this is a big problem because this is completely against what NATO had said was going to happen. NATO said, and this was the whole plan, that they were going to build off of last year's so-called gains and push through a spring offensive that would essentially end the conflict. Nothing of the sort was ever going to happen, but that was the fantasy. And of course, the NATO, the United States, a lot of their power projection at this point really thrives off of fantasy. The fantasy of exceptionalism, the fantasy of dominance, when all signals point to the erosion of that dominance. So Zelensky just got done at the UN General Assembly this past week of September 18th. And here's what the New York Times had to say about it. Zelensky's visit reveals strategy divide between Ukraine and the US. While the Ukrainian military remains focused on retaking territories in the east, American officials are pushing for a shift to the south. So on September 22nd, the Times said Ukraine will retake the fiercely contested eastern city of Bakhmut from Russia by the end of the year, Zelensky predicted during his visit to Washington. An assertion that shows the gulf between Kiev and American war planners who believe that Ukraine should be focused more on the south. Zelensky at a meeting with American editors also predicted that Ukrainian troops would deoccupy 2 more cities taken by Russia. He did not say which cities he was talking about. We will do everything not to stop during the difficult days in autumn with not good weathers and in winter. By contrast, he predicted that Vladimir Putin would pause operations because he lost so many troops. They're dead, Zelensky said. So this is Zelensky's briggadatio. This is his bravado, right? He's really showing out here. Zelensky renewed his plea for long-range missiles, for ATACMS, which the U.S. is saying any day now, but actually word is they're not coming. We don't have another way out, said Zelensky. Intelligence and military officials have long questioned why Ukraine has fought so hard in Bakhmut, the scene of one of the bloodiest battles of the war. In March, Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said the city was more symbolic than it is strategic and operational in value. But Zelensky has been intent on trying to retake lost territory, and Ukraine has committed a large number of troops and weapons in retaking Bakhmut and defending the surrounding Donbass region. Some American officials say the fight in Bakhmut has become something of an obsession for Zelensky and his military leaders. The Ukrainians' relentless focus on the city led them to believe that a possible victory was just around the corner, long after American officials had countered them to move to other targets because victory for either side would be Pyrrhic. But Mr. Zelensky could be counting on the dysfunction in Wagner mercenary group after the demise of its leader in a plane crash last month. So they're talking about Wagner. That happened a long time ago. Now we're still talking about Wagner here. Oh, the dysfunction of Wagner. If things are so dysfunctional after Prigozhin's death, why hasn't Ukraine been able to make any progress? For Zelensky, his part, he pushed back on any notion that Ukraine was not making its plans deliberately and said his forces were following comprehensive plans. Those plans have divided Washington and Kiev. So American military officials want Ukraine to push and liberate the city of Melitopol in the country's south. While this has been a focus of recent drives, time is growing short for Ukraine to breach Russian defenses. Retaking Melitopol, American officials have said, would allow the Ukraine to use short-range artillery to decimate Russian supply mines in Crimea, putting pressure on Russian stranglehold there. Some American officials say that the Ukrainian counteroffensive appears likely to fall short of its strategic goals of cutting off, narrowing the land bridge between Crimea and the Russian border. Russian minefields prove a potent defense, and the Ukrainian government has been extraordinarily worried about the high casualties that would be caused by any effort to breach those barriers. U.S. officials said it would soon be even more difficult for Ukrainian forces to sustain a drive forward as the ground becomes soft and muddy. Some say that within a few weeks, Ukraine's army will need time to rebuild their stockpile of equipment and rest forces exhausted by summer fighting. But Zelensky's rebutting these arguments, insisting that Russian forces were looking to take a break. His forces would not stop. I'm not the best person for the military in the world, but I know what Putin wants. I know he needs to pause. So all projection, but this is saying that the United States is not prepared. The United States is not prepared for what's going on, and Ukraine is not going to be able to achieve its goals. So even there, where they're trying to pose this as simply a conflict of how to fight this war, the reality is that they are admitting that actually the counteroffensive as a whole is not going to achieve its goals, and that's why they want Zelensky to be more efficient. They want the Ukrainian armed forces to fight more strategically, i.e. how the United States wants them to fight. The United States wants to see a long war, and they want to see a pause. That's clear from what the New York Times is communicating, albeit through plenty of smokescreen and propaganda. But Alexei Arestovich, you may remember him. He was ousted. He had to resign based on comments he made about a missile that was fired at a residential building in Dnipro. And this happened. When did this happen? Here, we're going to pull it up. I think it says when this happened. April 2022. So early in the war, he wasn't deposed in 2022. When was he deposed now? He had to leave. Let me see. Alexei Arestovich. I'm going to talk about what he commented on. Okay, but he was deposed for making comments, and this is what he has to say: that it's going to last until 2035. All right, 2035. So this is one of Zelensky's top aides who had to resign based on comments he made earlier in the conflict. But this is what I think many people are thinking. The standoff between Moscow and Kiev might evolve into a hybrid war and drag on for years, said Arestovich. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine could continue for more than a decade, said Alexei Arestovich, a former advisor to Zelensky, saying that he predicted the two neighbors are unlikely to resolve their differences in the near future. That will last until 2035 for sure, he said in an interview on September 17th, posted on his YouTube channel. According to Arestovich, Russia is out seeking a new form of empire, which will never come into existence without Ukraine. The former presidential aide, so of course, Arestovich is no friend of Russia. Arestovich is promoting this line that Russia wants to absorb all of Ukraine, and of course that can't be done anytime soon. The former presidential aide then doubled down on his forecast, saying the acute phase of the standoff will continue until 2035. He argued that it does not have to be a military one. The two sides might reach a ceasefire and hostilities altogether, but the conflict would then continue on diplomatic, intelligence, economic, and information fronts. Ukraine has gotten used to living in a situation of constant military threat to maintain advanced alert status, Arestovich said, suggesting Kiev could follow Israel's example if it wants, or should follow its example if it wants to adapt to such circumstances. A war can break out on a border incident, or a border incident might happen at any moment, even after the fighting ends. Well, this has been something that's been talked about. You know, they call Colombia the Israel of Latin America, South America, because of its important role as essentially U.S. military base to terrorize the rest of Latin America. And of course, that has had huge ramifications for Colombia. But Ukraine is becoming a very similar kind of thing. Ukraine is becoming essentially a NATO outpost that is meant to terrorize or attempt to promote and provoke and engage in conflict with Russia. So Arestovich noted in 2020 that he made such a forecast in 2022 of April, just 2 months into the conflict. His words shocked people at the time. On Tuesday, Bloomberg reported that 7 of the world's leading developed economies, known as the G7, believe Russia and Ukraine could be in conflict for another 6 to 7 years. The timeline has been stretched due to the apparent lack of progress in Ukraine's counteroffensive, citing multiple officials. One such official, told Bloomberg that Kiev is likely to struggle with insufficient Western arms supplies and rising personnel losses. Regarding such forecasts, Ukraine and its Western backers still oppose the idea of negotiations with Russia and have rejected any resolution of the conflict that involves Ukraine ceding territory that it claims as its own. Moscow has repeatedly said it's ready for peace talks, but insisted they must take into account Russia's interests and the reality of the ground, which saw 4 former Ukrainian territories, of course, be admitted into Russia. So that's what Alexei Arestovich, the former aide who had to resign earlier in the conflict. And he's saying it's going to last till 2035. This is something that many, I think, in at least those who have any kind of reality attached to their heads, this is what they believe, okay? They believe that this is a long war, that this is going to last for a long time. But of course, Arestovich's assertion that this is Russia, that Russia's promoting this, Russia's provoking this, because even if it's not going to engage militarily, it's going to want to absorb Ukraine otherwise, is false. I mean, this is false. I can show you what is driving Ukraine to continue to be a proxy war for here on out, and it is Ukraine. It is NATO. It is NATO. It is Ukraine's NATO backers. And here you have another indication that this is going to be a long war. You have these tanks and these weapons that are being pledged to Ukraine. Many of them have been burning on the battlefield, the Leopard 2s. These have been burning on the battlefield. A lot of them have been destroyed. And now the United States is saying, this has to be used strategically. And this is what Ukrainian intelligence is saying through its U.S. masters. It says Abrams tanks should only be used for very specific purposes. U.S.-supplied Abrams tanks should only be deployed in Kiev in specific breakthrough operations, or they will be quickly destroyed by Russian forces, said Kirill Budanov, head of the Military Intelligence Directorate, GUR, of the Ukrainian military. Ukraine is looking forward to receiving the 31 M1 Abrams tanks that Washington promised to provide in January. That was 9 months ago. Budanov said in an interview with the War Zone on Friday. During their meeting at the White House on Thursday, U.S. President Joe Biden told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that the first M1 Abrams will be arriving next week. However, the spy chief warned that if American armor is deployed on the front line and just in combined arms fight, they will not live very long on the battlefield. In order to make the best use of the tanks, Kiev should only engage them in well-crafted breakthrough operations. Mind you, they're supposed to be doing that right now. The whole counteroffensive is supposed to be a breakthrough operation. It's supposed to have beaten back Russia's front line, infiltrated it, destroyed it, and the territory that Russia is defending, that Russia is claiming as its own, that Russia is collaborating with the forces in the Donbass to protect, all of that is supposed to be taken back. It's supposed to be taken. They literally have been talking about, we're going to take it all back, and then we're going to head to Crimea, and all they can muster are desperate drone strike, desperate airstrike attacks on Sevastopol and Crimea, while they can't even think about deploying the very tanks that they were promised 8-9 months ago. This is how bad the situation is. This is why you're not seeing ATACMS or anything like that be sent either, because the United States is saying, you're not doing well enough. We're not going to go through the Challenger 2s, the Leopards. We're not going to have that with U.S. Abrams tanks. We're not going to see those burn on the battlefield. We're not going to give Russia that public relations boost. We're not going to give them that diplomatic boost because that's what they've received throughout this whole conflict. So I want to now just wrap this up. Okay, I want to wrap up this story by showing you the neocon mentality. Okay, so the neocon mentality is what actually is at the root of the problem here, okay? It is what is going to prolong this conflict. It's already doing so. It is the neocon foreign policy establishment that is boosting this idea of a long war of attrition now in order to essentially whitewash the reality of the situation, which is Russia was fighting a war of attrition in order to break down and destroy Ukraine's military capacity. Of course, destroy these forces that Canada likes to applaud, the NAZIs, that run rampant within Ukraine's political and military structures. But more importantly, the war of attrition fought by Russia was all about keeping Russia stable, keeping ordinary lives of the Russian people stable, trying to lessen the impact on the global economy, attempting in all kinds of ways, real diplomacy, all of which have been rejected for the most part, except for the fact that you also have Europe and many countries, of course, around the world, but Europe in particular, which has been the most rabidly for sanctions and for supporting Ukraine. Now they have been basically violating their own sanctions in order to simply survive economically. But I want to show you the neocon mentality, okay? First, and we're going to do so through our friend Thomas Friedman, one of the most vile neocons on the face of the planet. So Thomas Friedman is promoting a message that I think is very popular, okay? And
I'm Tom Friedman, and I'm the foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times.
Okay, so I don't actually want to play to it yet. It's a pretty long video, so I'm not going to play a pretty long audio. I'm not going to play the whole thing. But I want you just to see I hate the fact that they gloss over it with this blue. But the title here, Bringing Ukraine to NATO and the EU is the Key to Peace. That is the message. Basically violating the security concern, the principal security concern of Russia is what's going to bring peace. That is the mindset here, because the neocons, the foreign policy establishment as a whole, they think like this is their brain trust here. Thomas Friedman, he is their brain trust. He reflects what these forces think, and he is saying that bringing Ukraine into NATO, into the EU, is the only way towards peace. And we're hearing a lot more of this from Jens Stoltenberg and from others who are also admitting that this war is going to be long, that Ukraine is not going to achieve its objectives, but nonetheless, the only way to peace is to achieve NATO's objectives at the expense of Russia. Doesn't sound like a real pathway to peace. So let's listen to some of this.
I just returned from Kyiv, Ukraine, and I would start every day by walking around the grounds of St. Michael's Golden Monastery, which is a beautiful Orthodox church, but also with incredible grounds. There was something very new in the piazza, and it was an exhibition of captured Russian destroyed tanks and armored personnel carriers. Some were fairly intact, others were just completely gutted and rusted. But as I would walk there, this contrast between this rusted military equipment in the middle of this beautiful piazza, and I eventually realized it reminded me of a meteor, that it was like a meteor that came from out.
Apologies. You can tell that Thomas Friedman is excited about war with Russia. Just FYI, if you haven't noticed that already, he's very excited here.
Outer space and landed on this country. Of course, it wasn't a meteor. It was an invasion by Putin's army. And they're still trying to figure out how to get this meteor out of the heart of their city, out of the heart of their country. That's really the struggle that's going on there. My recent trip to Ukraine taught me the West focus has to be engineering some kind of end to this conflict. And it can only come to an end if Ukraine is in NATO and the European Union.
You see what he did there? This is key, because after that whole flowery. Ukraine is trying to liberate itself from Russian occupation through this flowery metaphor that, to me, lost the plot, and I think most people would daze out hearing that, gibberish. You hear that this is the argument. This is what people like Thomas Friedman, as a reflection of the neocon mentality, this is what they want. This is the architects of the conflict. People like him are the ones who boost it, and some people like him are actually the ones writing the script. So that is all you really need to know. This is the way that they're going to frame how this is going to go. This long war of attrition, this need to freeze the conflict. Oh, no. We don't need to freeze or end the conflict based on any kind of diplomatic resolution, any kind of attempt to reach a balance, the negotiated settlement. No. We need to step up. We need to escalate to end the conflict. That is what he's saying.
Adding Ukraine to NATO and the European Union would be the biggest geopolitical shift in our lifetime. You put Ukraine in the EU, and that becomes our Russia policy. I think the best thing that happened in my life was the creation of the European Union. Now, most Americans will do anything for the EU except read about it. Okay, so the EU is this really boring thing that the Europeans do, and there's a parliament and a commission, and we can't figure out any of it. But in fact, the EU is one of the greatest miracles in global history. A continent, a giant space that from time immemorial basically was famous for endless tribal, ethnic, and nationalist family conflicts.
So Thomas Friedman is, again, this is how they think. The EU is this great civilization, heralding advancement for the world. Mind you, the European Union is in recession. The entire Eurozone is set to contract economically. And it's not Russia's fault. It's the EU's fault. The EU hasn't built anything in years. You go to Europe, go anywhere in Europe, see what the EU has built. Have they been doing what China has been doing? Have they been building anything? No, the EU has been a lapdog of the United States, its foreign policy, its global economic policy of super exploitation. Look at what's happening in Nigeria. We can go on and on and on. With France and the UK and Germany as being the head, essentially, of the Eurozone. Germany is gutting itself. It's destroying its own economy just to fight the US's war. Helped cover up for the destruction of Nord Stream. We can go on and on and on, but this is the neocon mentality. The EU is wonderful. NATO is wonderful. We'll continue just for a little longer.
Became the biggest geographic center of free markets, free people, the rule of law, and human rights. That is a miracle. It's an incredible, boring miracle. If we bring Ukraine into that European Union, that would be one of the most consequential geopolitical tipping points since East Germany was united with West Germany. East Germany. Who was the Russian spy in East Germany who was introduced to international relations by running the KGB there? It was Vladimir Putin. It was Vladimir Putin whose big introduction to geopolitics was watching the magnet of the West melt down East Germany.
I mean, this guy has a flair for torturing us. Just torturing us with complete historical distortions and Putin war pornography. I mean, I said I was going to play you a little bit more. I think I'm going to stop there because I think what we just need to know, later he's going to argue that NATO is, of course, the military arm of global Western democracy, and Ukraine needs to join in order to be fortified and protected. I don't need to give you more of a rundown because I don't think I can take any more, and I don't think you all can take any more. But the point is Thomas Friedman, people like him, these are people who are in the positions of power in Washington, in NATO, in the EU. They are the ones who are going to drive the prolonging of this war because they're making the argument, as shown here by Friedman, that Russia's top security concern, its top issue, Ukrainian membership in NATO should be accelerated and forwarded. And mind you, this is a fantasy. This isn't going to happen anytime soon. Actually, I don't even think the Biden administration, Trump, anyone in the U.S. Establishment who is going to take the helm of the commander-in-chief position, regardless of whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever else, they don't want it either. Because FAFO, mess around and find out. See what happens when Russia joins NATO. You think the war is bad now? You think the conflict, this war of attrition, this special military operation is the worst that it can get? See what happens if Ukraine is admitted into NATO. There's a reason why Ukraine is not in NATO. But I'm just going to show you who Thomas Friedman is. These are the architects. These are the same people. He wrote this in 2015, basically saying that you need to arm ISIL. Go ahead, ruin my day. Okay, so I'm going to show you where he makes this argument. He talks about Israel, blah, blah, blah. We can't wage these wars. So he says, okay, so we learn to live with Iran on the edge of a bomb, which he's a huge proponent of the lie that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon. But we shouldn't at least bomb the Islamic State to smithereens and help destroy the head-chopping menace. Now, I despise ISIS as much as anyone, but let me just toss out a different question. Should we be arming ISIS? Or let me ask it differently. Why are we, for the third time since 9/11, fighting a war on behalf of Iran? That's how he viewed the U.S.'s fraudulent war on terror in the region when it comes to Syria in particular. That's how he viewed it. The United States, the Pentagon, the CIA, funding armed groups, most of them jihadists, to fight each other, Al-Qaeda affiliates. And he's saying we need to find ISIS. We need to arm ISIS. This is not some coincidence. The U.S. was already doing this in a certain capacity. But that is who Thomas Friedman is. That question he asked, he answered in the affirmative. We probably should be, because it would stick. We would stick a needle in the eyes of our so-called adversaries. This is how the neocons think. By any means necessary, arm ISIS, arm Al-Qaeda, fund and arm the Ukrainian former, SS Waffen division holdovers now in Azov. That's what you should be doing. That's how the United States is going to maintain its supremacy. All right. And lastly, okay, I'm going to show you hold on one second. So Thomas Friedman supported the Iraq War. I'm actually not going to show you that video. He supported the Iraq War. He was a hawk. He is a hawk. But his hawkishness, I just wanted to end this segment, is an example of what they are thinking. What they're thinking on Ukraine is a reflection of how they thought about Syria, how they thought about Iraq. It's all part of a continuous foreign policy spearheaded by the United States. The United States, led by the neocon foreign policy establishment, now wants to dismember Russia, wants to dismember China, wants to weaken them, contain them, destroy them in order to maintain and expand its hegemony. All of the wars it fought prior, from the disastrous intervention in Libya to Iraq, that are still having huge ramifications today. Just look at what's happened to Libya. All of it is part of a continuous process of expanding this decrepit empire to destroy any hope for genuine peace, for peaceful development, for stability, and most importantly, for the needs of all people who are suffering in this world to find a better way, to find a better life. This includes, of course, the global south, the oppressed countries of the world that Russia and China are aligned with and also should be included in when it comes to the hybrid wars waged against them. And it also includes people in the collective West themselves, who are seeing their livelihoods, their living standards decline and drop as Canada applauds former Nazis, as the United States and NATO arm them to fight Russia, and as the overall picture when it comes to Ukraine gets bleaker and bleaker, and yet the United States is not thinking about pulling back, pulling out. No, it is thinking about escalating, expanding, just taking a pause and a breather while it manages the situation, while it starts to shape, as Thomas Friedman is, this idea that, yeah, maybe we need to pause, maybe we need to end the war, but we can do it on terms of our liking. We can do it by pushing our objectives nonetheless, and probably also finding other areas to achieve objectives elsewhere. That is why, I mean, this is a big reason why the United States does not want to go all in on Ukraine in the way that Zelensky has hoped. Zelensky thinks his mission is the most important one, to destroy Russia. The United States says, well, if we try to destroy Russia, we'll get into a war that we probably can't handle, and then we won't be able to destroy China. This is the navigation of the United States right now. This is the negotiation that the ruling elite, the neocons, this is what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about Ukraine or Ukrainians or democracy or anything like that. They're thinking about how they can hedge their bets and win the world through destruction. Win it through destruction and essentially maintain control over the lives, the wealth, and of course, the political direction of the world until further notice. The end of history is what they are fighting for. Of course, though, it's a fantasy, it's a myth, and we are seeing it unravel in Ukraine as NATO, as the United States, as the forces of Wall Street, the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex, they all start to cope with the fact that this conflict is not going to end anytime soon, and their objectives have essentially failed. Their objectives are not going to be met, and now they're going to have to try to find a way to prolong the conflict so they can regroup and then try again another time. That's what we cannot allow them to do. With that said, everybody, that is the end of that segment. So, I do have another story if there are no questions for Ask Me Anything. But before I get to the Ask Me Anything portion, I just want to do a few plugs, okay? While I have you all here. So one, tomorrow actually I'm streaming again. And I hope that this audio setup is good enough, because it looks like my setup has tanked. I have Scott Ritter coming on tomorrow to talk about, I'm going to have him go off on the Canada situation, so don't worry about that. Scott Ritter will be back on, friend of the show, tomorrow, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to be there, September 26th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Save the date. I'll make sure to have all that stuff ready and promoted, starting to be promoted early afternoon, the 26th. Then I want to show you, I'm going to pull up and I'm going to send you the link. So DD Geopolitics, friend of the show, really like a super friend of the show, honestly, for all of the, they've helped with volunteer labor around my thumbnails. They're going live, I believe it is, what date does this say? 12 p.m. the same day, so the 26th. So before, they're going to have a really great stream, Voices from Donetsk. They're going to be talking to a host of journalists and people on the ground, from Nyasta, who's a local journalist there, Ivan, who's a war correspondent, Alexander, a peace activist, and Alexandra, who's a war correspondent from Moscow University, who left for Donbass to talk about the truth. So they're going to talk tomorrow. You should follow them. I put the link in the video description. You can find them at DD Geopolitics on YouTube. The link is in the video description. They've helped me out a lot, and part of the reason why I ask for support is because I do try to support their project, because especially through the labor and those folks who are helping me with labor, because it's very important. So I put the link in the video description. Watch that stream, subscribe to their channel, all that good stuff. It's going to be a great conversation about what it's like on the ground in Donbass, people like Patrick Lancaster have been covering this, and they're going to talk to 4 journalists and war correspondents of the region to really give a good view of what's going on. So that's happening all tomorrow. Tomorrow, DD Geopolitics at noon Eastern time. Then me at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time with Scott Ritter. He's going to go out. His Canada situation cannot. We're going to continue to rail on that because his grasp on the history of fascism is quite impressive, to say the least. And of course, we'll get into Ukraine, what's happening with the shifts in Ukraine, and we'll talk about other developments that have occurred in the multipolar world since the last time we spoke. So here's the link again to DD Geopolitics. And with that said, everybody, I just wanted to do a couple of stories. So if there's any questions, let me see. We have many super chats, which I will shout out at the end. But so priority, Patreon subscribers, if you're out there, all right, go to Patreon. I'm going to go to Patreon right now and see if I can find any questions asked, okay? Doesn't look like any questions asked on the post, but please send them in a comment or even a DM. I will periodically refresh. Substack members, same thing. If you're in the audience right now, be sure to go to the post. In the post, the comment section is specifically for Substack members. Make the comments are specifically for Substack paid members. Do leave a question in the comments. And let's see if I see any Rockfin family. Hello. Hi, Rockfin family. Let's see. Rumble. Anything here? I don't see anything in the live chat on Rumble. 32 watching. No, nothing in the live chat, though, it seems like. One comment saying hello. Hello to you. So I don't have any questions right now for the Ask Me Anything, which is fine. Because I can get to the shout outs. Okay. And then I can get into, I can either do one more story or I can head out. I might just head out, honestly. But yeah, let me just talk about my how grateful I am, okay? While I wait for questions. You can do it through super chats. If there's no super chats, I will also take just questions through the chat. All right, now we got 10 people waiting in DD Geopolitics, so thank you so much for supporting them. Got a YouTube member who's asking a question. How is my dog? My dog is great, actually. He is doing well. He's healthy. He's very relaxed here in the home. His reactivity, his hyper arousal toward dogs has reduced a lot with a lot of work and a lot of training. His recall is really good, although I don't test him off-leash recall in the city. Too many variables and factors out of my control, so I'm not going to do that. Plus, I also don't like it when people do that in the city because most people don't have recall over their dogs here, and it leads to dangerous situations. So I tend to keep him on the leash. But his recall is getting better on leash when I let him explore on long line, and so it's going great. It's going great. So thank you for that question. Sherry, thanks for your membership. All right. Let's see. I'll do super chats first. I don't see any questions in the super chat, but Sabby, thank you so much, Sabby. I'm loving the growth on your channel. I hope to see it continue, and thanks for the super chat. I also need to start supporting monetarily the channels that I support as well. But do follow Sabby Sabs. She's great on all things U.S. politics. She's also good on foreign policy, although her channel does a wide range of topics from electoral politics to grassroots movements to a lot of things. So you should definitely follow Sabby. Thank you, Sabby. Archie, what's it? To help you get a new shirt. Thank you. I have other shirts, but you know I don't know. This is like my lucky shirt for my streams. And then Rashid VP, thank you so much for being a YouTube member and for joining the Peep Show. What's left says, congrats on 100,000 subs. Well earned and greatly appreciated. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for your support. Thank you for your contribution as well. Lewis, congrats on 100K. Let's all laugh at Canada's blunder together. Yeah, we should laugh at that. It's pretty pathetic. It's pretty pathetic. And Wayfinder, thank you so much for your super chat and for your kind comments. Glory to in all anti-fascists worldwide. Thank you so much. Way to go, more viral than Russell Brand Trudeau. Yeah, this is true. Jeffrey, so thank you, Jeffrey, for these congrats on 100K. Thank you so much. Rob says, grateful for your wide-ranging contributions for better understanding. Thank you very much. Thanks you. We're embarrassed about actor Trudeau, our actor Trudeau PM. A lot of people in Western Canada really hate him. Thanks so much. I'm not surprised why. You know, I think that there's a lot of contradictory hatred for Trudeau. Thank you all, Rob, Jeffrey, Anna. Hatred toward him. I think people are very sick of the neoliberal kind of hand-wringing with Trudeau. You know, this like, you know, the so-called wokeism for me is more about like identity reductionism and exploiting legitimate and illegitimate concerns that have been corporatizing them and then selling them as ways to justify the most heinous of policies. So people are sick of that. You know, we can have real discussions on race, on racism, on gender and sexism and those kind of things. We can have real discussions as human beings and adults, regardless of how we feel about these things. We can even make real changes on these things. And it's happened in the course of history. There's a reason why they're exploiting these things. We've had many changes in the last 40 years alone, 60 years alone, that have both been good in some respects and also problematic in others. So we've had changes, but at the same time, we know that the ruling elite are exploiting these things, and people are getting sick of that. And it's really becoming part of the architecture of the unraveling of the collective West, Canada in particular. So thank you so much. Dark Druganev says, how are you able to give a speech at the United Nations? Well, that is a great question. So Russia, the ambassador to Russia, Dmitry Polansky, who you might have seen, I think he's been on the Gray Zone before. He is the ambassador to the United Nations for Russia. He holds a meeting, or he calls a meeting on behalf of the Russian side on the dangers posed to the world, to global stability and peace due to the proliferation of arms, of Western arms to Ukraine in particular. This meeting has been held, I think, 68 times since the conflict, at least 68 times. Mine was the 68th that I attended. And so Dmitry Polansky has been bringing, he has invited journalists like Max Blumenthal. And so they wanted to essentially show a different side of the story that you don't usually get on platforms like this. And so at first, another person, a friend of mine, was invited, Brian Berletic of the New Atlas, but he couldn't make it. So he suggested me, and he thought it was important for a U.S. voice who is based in the United States to give such a talk. And that's basically how it happened. So thanks for that question. A lot of people say, oh, well, you did it on behalf of Russia. In fact, that's not really the case. Russia holds this meeting, but certainly all member states, especially the permanent members, have the possibility of bringing on people to brief. There were other briefers there, and I wasn't the only one. So it wasn't just, you know, of course, Dmitry Polansky was looking for someone to give an alternative position on this question, to not just go by the Western mainstream media's line, the neocon line, all of that, the anti-Russian line. But at the same time, you know, it wasn't as if it was coordinated by the Russian government. No, this is something that's pretty standard. It's something that happens all the time. UN Security Council meetings, this is what can be done there. You can make it a platform for trying to make arguments that will push and pull on the international community to do the right thing. And that's really what this meeting was about. Of course, the situation in the UN is very dire. It's very, it's troubling. The United Nations is dominated by Western countries, the permanent members, United States, UK, and France. They have outsized influence out of the 5 permanent members. And of course, even among non-permanent members, there is still a lot of influence that the collective West holds. And so a big push for countries like Russia and China had been, we need to expand the Security Council, make it bigger, and include more global South countries in order to really represent the security situation worldwide. And I wholly support that effort. Here's RJ Ramon. I missed you on Due Dissidence, but I've been waiting for you guys to talk since I know that Russell in particular has some big misconceptions about China. Did you have a chance to clear any of that up? No, I didn't. I didn't know. Actually, no, Russell was not there. Russell was not there. I think he's on some kind of break or something. So he wasn't there. So I did not have a chance to clear that up. I would, of course, have done so if he had questions about China. Maybe one day when he is back, we can have a longer conversation about China on Due Dissidence. I'm hoping that more of the domestic channels, the channels that focus on domestic politics more than I do, are willing to have this conversation. It's surely to come up during the elections. Of course, it's already been coming up throughout this, throughout this whole entire period that I've been doing work on this channel. But at the same time, the Ukraine situation has, of course, taken up a lot of the airspace. So no, I did not talk really about China during this stream. It was a lot about Zelensky's situation. It was a lot about I was basically co-hosting the program, commenting on a lot of commentary that Keaton Weiss, the other host, that he had put together. So thank you for that question, though. It's a good one. So yeah, any other questions? JB, this is very sweet, JB. Thank you so much. I owe you forever and ever an interview. I apologize for that. We will get to it. Let's get to it as soon as possible, honestly, seriously. Because I do want to come on your channel. It'll be super fun. Thank you so much for supporting. All right. I appreciate it. And then we have Patreon. Fahim from Patreon says, Danny, can you talk about Argentina and Millie if you can? Wow, I really have not been able to follow this situation. I think what they're talking about is the possibility of the new president. Oh, I see. Even just a cursory look. I have not been following Argentina's political situation, but I do know that Argentina is in trouble. Okay, so you talk about Javier Milei, who's a presidential candidate. Okay, and Javier Milei, I think, is trying to push through major austerity. He's an economist. He is part of the Freedom Advances Party. This is a right-wing party, of course. And it looks like Javier Milei is trying to push through austerity through becoming president. And there are presidential elections coming up. I believe he serves in the Chamber of Commerce now, if I'm not correct. But in any event, yes, I would need an interview. This is important. I have not been following the situation in Argentina as much as I wish I could. But I can give, in terms of a broad outline, it seems like what's happening is what I think a lot of people are fearing as the contradictory administration of Alberto Fernandez perhaps comes to a close very soon. Argentina, there's a lot of talk that next month Fernandez's reign could be over. the right is building steam, and I think Javier Milei is probably part and parcel of that process. He poses as a libertarian, but libertarian. I'm not a libertarian. I am not against libertarians when they take positions on peace, but I do not agree with libertarians' economic agenda. I do not believe there's any such thing as a fully free market, and I don't believe that we can somehow go back to some kind of unfettered capitalism, as if unfettered capitalism during, let's say, the British Empire's Industrial Revolution, the United States' Industrial Revolution, and the like did not include massive exploitation and state intervention on behalf of corporatists, capitalists, and warmongers. That is a fantasy. Libertarianism, in that sense, economically, is a model with no real solution except more austerity. All right, that is, and some of the real good-hearted, kind-hearted, maybe misdirected libertarians who I will be in solidarity with on peace initiatives. No doubt, this is not to be antagonistic to any kind of libertarians who have genuine, because I do know libertarians with genuine anti-war politics. There are some who are not so genuine. Let's be honest here. There are some that are. But in terms of economic policy, it's not, to me, it's not realistic, and it's not based on material reality. You're not just there. Some of them are more anarchistic, for example, and believe, voluntarism, and we're just gonna all all be the same, horizontal, and we will volunteer ourselves and not have any kind of dictatorship over us by a government, and then that will lead to a fully flourishing, free economy, free market economy. No, absolutely not. That's not how it goes. The truth is that in order to take any kind of power, you're going to have to deal with the government. You're going to have to deal with the state, more specifically. You're going to have to deal with the armed bodies, the political bodies. You're going to have to do something about them, and you're probably going to have to wrestle hold of them in order. We're going to need true power over these things if we're going to make sure that warmongers, neocons, chicken hawks, all these forces that are driving the world into endless war and austerity are not able to. They have the power now. They have real, true power. So until we're ready to talk about that, I'm on a big digression. I'm not ascribing to libertarianism, but on peace, if we can be together on that, great. But in Latin America, it's different. In Latin America, libertarianism is no more than a false label for what has been the case there for many decades, which is US-backed Washington consensus austerity. Okay, so that is what is deemed to happen or going to happen if Fernandez is displaced. And of course, Argentina's BRICS membership and things like that are also in question should Fernandez lose. And of course, BRICS membership was already something Argentina was teetering on and wavering on during the BRICS summit. It did end up becoming admitted, but it's hard to say where things will go for Argentina. It's a very difficult situation with the debt, the poverty, the shock therapy that has occurred there already, and of course the political situation, which is dominated by the right, the political right. So that is what that's what's in store for Argentina. And it seems like Javier Milei, who I'm not an expert on this stuff, seems like he is part and parcel of this project. He's an economist, and he is running a campaign right now. I guess he's the national deputy there, a national deputy there in government. So he's influential, and I'm not sure about the prospects, but it seems like he's trying to push through an austerity agenda. All right, anything else? Let me look at, I see another super chat here. Oh no, that's from, we already went through that. Let's see if there's, I saw a member, Sherry, Danny, we have to discuss libertarians, the Koch, the Koch brothers, they, Charles Koch, those guys, they deem themselves as the first libertarians. Yes. And what did they do? They simply fought for, gained and wielded influence over the state in order to promote more austerity, to squeeze people further, to privatize everything, to create in fuel wars of aggression, to steal and plunder. That is the agenda. You know, for libertarians individually, many of them would say, no, we're not for theft, we're not for plunder, we're for a fair economy based on no government intervention, things like that, we're against war. I can be down for the against war thing. We're just going to have conversations and debates about the economic situation because there's something very real about the misconception of what a libertarian economy would bring. We can't just talk about this in idealistic senses. We have to understand that the state is not some kind of monolith, right? Let's just take the example of Russia, all right? Let's take the example of Russia. Russia, after the Soviet Union fell, you could kind of argue that that was an economy that was moving toward libertarianism. Shock therapy was about destroying any semblance of government regulation, of government intervention on behalf of the people in the economy, so that oligarchs, so that so-called free marketeers, people in the West, in the country, could steal and loot and plunder from Russia. In that sense, the movement toward a more libertarian economy actually led to utter immiseration. Now, of course, libertarians would probably quibble, hey, that included a lot of state intervention. Look at what the United States did in supporting Yeltsin, etc. Well, of course, because we're living in the real world. We have to understand that libertarianism in the abstract is really not a conversation that's worth having when the real world is right here to wrestle with and to try to intervene in on behalf of progress, on behalf of peace, and on behalf of the people. So there might be a lot of libertarians out there who actually oppose what the US is doing in Ukraine. It might actually have sympathies toward Russia. Well, Vladimir Putin is far from a libertarian. Vladimir Putin is for very strong regulation. Actually, it was those regulations that were implemented after the year 2000 when he came to power, which included punishing some of these oligarchs for what they did and bringing in the rest of them that were willing to remain part of Russia and steering the economy back on the right track with heavy government intervention. Look at Gazprom, the most influential, arguably, company in Russia. It's state-owned. Many of Russia's companies are state-owned now, especially in the commanding heights, because that's the only way that they can rebuild their destroyed economy after the Soviet Union was gutted, dismembered, and destroyed, leading to the immiseration of working people to the point where you had life expectancy drop by nearly a decade for men, nearly a decade for working age men. So this is a huge problem, right? This idea of libertarianism. We need to talk more about what kind of economy. You can call it socialism. I call it, I'm a communist, but we call it whatever we want. But we need to talk about a people's economy, an economy controlled by people, a government, a state that actually has the power of the people, not just at heart, not just in the minds and ideas of representatives. Because AOC and these folks, they can talk a big game about being for the people, but once they're in the administrative role, once they're actually ruling, how do they rule? They rule the same. Why? Because the state is the same. The system is the same. Capitalism is the same. Imperialism is the same. They have not changed. Until we make a fundamental transformation of that system and we have wrestled hold that state and made it and directed it toward our aims, how are we going to truly have peace? We can't rely on Mark Milley for that. We can't rely on Joe Biden for that, and Donald Trump even for that, no matter how he talks. We can't, because the state is controlled by a very small number of people. The elite, the capitalists, the imperialists. These people are a very small segment of the world population, but because they have the ability to wage wars, to implement sanctions, to lower wages, to make cuts to needed services, to privatize everything whenever they feel they can, to drill pipelines for drill oil, to frack your gas, to do all these. They have the ability to do that, and then they can tell you to get to work on it. That is power. That is what we don't have. That is why we need to come up with an idea, vision to win people over around, so that we can begin to build power amongst the people. That's what we need to do. Here we go. Rob Juneau has a question. Thank you so much, Rob, for this question. You say, do you think Russia-China scientific partnerships will counter out the West's big pharma? Ooh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. So, at this current juncture, I don't think anytime soon. And the reason for that is the supply chain is very tricky. So you often hear China being blamed, for example, for the fentanyl crisis. Ridiculous. China does produce medications, but they're medications to be used medically. And once they are imported, then it's up to the governments and the countries involved to use them how they see fit. The US has a ridiculous opioid crisis that's out of control. And a lot of the reason is because doctors overprescribe pain medications, or the fact that so many people are in pain, need medication or prescribe them. And those medications help these doctors. But of course, the pharmaceutical companies make more money the more that they're used, the more that they're taken. People get addicted, then people can't afford them, or people need to stop taking them. The doctors stop prescribing them, and then people get the illicit drugs. That's part of the process. It's not all how it works, but that's some of how it works. And so China is often blamed for this. But at the same time, China is part of that supply chain. And it's going to take a while for Russia and China to develop their own supply chains around these kind of things in order to do this independently. And it's probably not their priority, right? At least in this realm. I do see Russia and China scientific partnerships doing really big things. We're going to see collaboration on space. We're going to see collaboration on high technology, because Russia desperately needs to advance in this area, and China has the means and the tools. So indeed, there is a lot of collaboration, computer technology, 5G technology, these kind of things that are going to make huge inroads. And Russia will certainly be very appreciative of that. And that strategic partnership will grow out of this collaboration. But in terms of big pharma and medically and all of that, I think there will be some progress. I mean, you saw with the COVID vaccines, right? Russia produced their own, China produced their own, and there was a lot of relationship building and trading and usage of the respective vaccines during the height of the pandemic. And so that was a statement that, yeah, the United States and the collective West, their vaccines, that not for them, right? Not for them. We're not going to allow that kind of influence in our country, and probably most people wouldn't even have taken them. So that's probably going to advance, sure. But in terms of like pharmaceuticals and like the real money makers, until things change in the collective West, until the United States, right? This is the contradiction of multipolarity too. Until the United States and until its European vassals have market shifts in how they do things economically, how their economic systems work, until they begin to change their models from, let's say, for-profit healthcare, especially the United States, in particular leading this drive, right? The number one promoter and a developer of this for-profit behemoth, the health insurance system, the big pharma system, until that, and even Europe's so-called socialized medicine is subsidizing this as well, even if it's a lot more controlled and regulated, because, well, it's made huge windfall profits for Bayers of the world, for example. So until that is addressed, right, until there's a real collective movement, until that, dare I say, system is overthrown, I don't think we're going to see Russia and China be able to make huge inroads in this area. Between each other, they'll be able to develop more and more capacity. But I don't know if healthcare necessarily and pharmaceuticals is going to be the number one priority. I think that Russia wants to become, Russia, I would say, is like a mid-tier economy. It's not an underdeveloped country, but there are many areas, because it's just 20 or so years out of shock therapy, essentially bringing it back into you could say third world or underdeveloped status, because it's not, it doesn't have the industrial architecture and capacity yet in all sectors of the economy. Militarily, it does, and in terms of raw materials, it does, but it hasn't been able to add value onto its economic chains like China. So, with that said, Russia, that's what Russia will be looking for mostly from its partnership, and China is going to be more than willing to help, of course, because the more developed Russia becomes, the closer their partnership becomes, the more potential both economies are going to see in terms of development and progress in the future in all areas. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in these partnerships, but we can be very sure that there's going to be deepening cooperation in all levels. We just saw that. We saw Wang Yi meet with Sergei Lavrov, meet with Vladimir Putin just last week. And in those meetings, it was an affirmation. It was a signal to the collective West that this partnership is only going to strengthen. And even if we do have a secret meeting with you in Malta to reiterate, hey, stop meddling in Taiwan, that China is never going to abandon its friend Russia. And Russia has only been appreciative of that. And we're going to see more of that to come. And so even in a lot of the, and this is why you could call both of these countries diplomatically genius, right? A genius in their diplomacy, is you really don't know how far they're going to be able to go. This is only a prediction, speculation, but at the end of the day, these two countries are very close to the chest, and their partnership only grows their economic, political, diplomatic, cultural, all of it only grows. All of these relations only grow. Yet, until we see the fruits of that, which we have seen, until we see it with our own eyes, we don't really know the plan. And that's because, well, unlike the Ukrainian counteroffensive, unlike how the United States and NATO have played Ukraine, Russia and China don't view the world as a video game. They look at realpolitik, they look at the world situation, they say, how can we strategically, intelligently, sophisticatedly, how can we maneuver this world situation to the benefit of us and everyone else, the world order as a whole? And they don't telegraph. They don't telegraph what they're going to be doing at any given moment together. And that, I think, is part of the genius of why these two countries are now the leaders, I think, of the global majority. They are leading the global majority to a better place because they share a similar vision where it matters on the global stage, regardless of whatever disagreements they may have or differences they may have. They share a collective agreement on the multipolar world, its importance, and they understand their responsibilities, which they constantly bring up in bilateral talks, in their readouts. We have responsibilities to the world order. We are here to promote the UN Charter. We are here to strengthen South-South cooperation, the global South as a whole. We're here to strengthen mechanisms for the global majority to develop and to progress, BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, etc. They understand their responsibilities. We just won't know exactly what they're going to do outside of speculation. But we can have a good idea based on, and I think this is very true, we can have a good idea of where they're going based on their past behavior. And their past behavior shows that, of course, cooperation is only going to grow because the threats against them are only growing, and also their understanding of each other is only growing. That is often not talked about, is how Russia and China had many years and years and years where they just were not able to understand each other based on an ideological conflict that turned into a military and political one and the Sino-Soviet split. And then, of course, the disaster that was the end of the Soviet Union after that, which finally opened up an opportunity to normalize relations between the two, but also led to Russia's relative weakness. And so China and Russia have not been able to understand their own strengths until the last several decades or so together, right? How are they complementary? How are they not? Russia's had to build itself out of the worst situation possible for itself. And China, of course, has only been a strong nation. Let me just tell you about how China views itself from the words, or the paraphrasing, I should say, of a young Communist Party member I met in China. And he was helping lead the delegation of the tour for the Chinese Association of International Understanding. He said that 3 generations ago, or the parents of his family, first 3 generations ago, 4 generations ago, he said that the great-grandparents of his family were responsible for liberating China, right? Establishing New China. His grandparents were responsible for developing New China as an independent country. His parents were responsible for building a prosperous China, and his responsibility is to build a strong China. That is how the party is talking about things. That is how many ordinary Chinese people are talking about their stage of development, where they are in history. And so, with that said, it's only been so long. They see the era of Xi Jinping as that era of becoming a strong country, not just prosperous, not just independent, not just liberated, but strong in the sense that it leads by example, that it has influence, and that there's a responsibility to wield that influence for the benefit of China and also for the benefit of the world. That is the responsibility, and that is how that is how people see it. And that is, I think, a good kind of window into how new it actually is, even for China, to be able to understand Russia, both as countries that are emerging, as leaders that are just finding their own strengths now, economically, politically, militarily, etc. And now they're able to figure out what can they do with this strength together? How can they build better? How can they build more? How can they really be agents of progress? When in the past, they've either had to repair and build and liberate, and now that era is over. Now it's the era of strength. So that's a very good question. I hope I answered some of it. Thank you, Rob. I have another super chat. Thank you so much to Sparky. Make Ukraine Russia again. Don't even leave a patch called Ukraine, lest it become a BlackRock property and remain a playground and money laundry for NATO and carpetbaggers. Sparky, you bring up some really good points. And, on that point, the Soviet Union was a disaster. Putin says it. But even Putin, I don't agree with everything Putin says. I don't agree with his assertion that the national question, the way that the Soviet Union addressed differences in ethnicities and nationalities, was wrong. Because if you've read some of Putin's speeches of late, he talks about, and I find this ironic, he talks about how the Soviet Union's attempted incorporation of various nationalities as single nations actually led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, because there was imbalances and imperfections in the way the Soviet Union could administer these areas. And on the one hand, there's probably some fact to that. And on the other, the Soviet Union's policy was self-determination for oppressed nations. And that was first implemented in the greater Russian sphere, what used to be the Russian so-called empire, which was, very, very contradictory in how imperial it really could be, because it was both weak and strong in many ways. But in terms of nationality, they were brutally repressed by the Tsar, by these oligarchic forces, by these semi-feudal forces. And the Soviet Union said, they're going to be able to independently govern themselves, but they're going to be part of this larger Soviet Union so they can bear the fruits of this new project. And that, in my opinion, was wildly successful, because it was under the Soviet Union that regions and now statelets, right, countries that are now countries like Kazakhstan, right, these Central Asian countries, they were far more prosperous under the Soviet Union than they are today outside of it. So I think, I disagree with Putin's assertion on that. But on the other hand, it's also ironic because you could see the way that Russia has treated the Donbass, for example, in the Ukraine conflict as part of a Soviet era like policy. Self-determination, right? Referendums, independence, they can be part of the Russian Federation, but they will be self-governing entities. They will essentially be states within a state. And that's the correct policy. That is one that respects their right to self-determination, but also allows them to be protected and share in the fruits of the overall Russian Federation. Different from the Soviet Union, of course, in the sense that the Soviet Union was a country, a republic, really, that was aiming toward communism, while the Russian Federation, I would say, doesn't really have an aim. Many communists would say it's just capitalist, but I do think that the Russian Federation is still a project in the making, given that the way that capitalism came to Russia was through chaos and plunder and theft. And that means that there has been an inertia against it, which has led to a whole lot of socialist-like policies, including the Communist Party of the Russian Federation growing in political influence, but also economic policies like nationalization that, while not socialist in terms of its governance, does have the makings of building a foundation for a more collective society and a more regulated economy, one that where the state has more direction. And of course, it's not communism or socialism, but it is a response to the shock therapy that is truly a reflection of the fall of the Soviet Union. So, I do think that when it comes to Ukraine, its history in the Soviet Union, of course, large portions of its territory, having strong Russian ties, and at the same time, and of course, some people go back to the Russian Empire, but I don't want to touch that because I don't think that's really even necessary. I think all we have to do is understand that the situation with Ukraine, the Ukraine proxy war, is the undoing of Ukraine, as Sparky said. Make Ukraine Russia again. Sure, I don't know if that's a winning slogan. I do think it speaks to a reality, though, that Ukraine was far better off in the Soviet Union than it was outside of the Soviet Union, and that the contradictions internally to the region that is known as Ukraine could only be resolved in this manner. We didn't know that. I was not privy to the situation in Ukraine between 1991 and 2022 until until 2014, until the coup in 2014. I really didn't pay attention. I mean, I did know about the Orange Revolution and all of that meddling by the NED, etc. But I didn't pay attention to the internal machinations that could make those things popular, or should I say, possible, and that could energize a certain minority potentially, or even a plurality of people in the country that hang on to perhaps Cold War prejudices, dare I say fascist prejudices. The way that Ukraine has been manipulated is actually its undoing. And the end of Ukraine is basically near, if not already happening. So, with that said, I don't think that Russia is necessarily aiming for absorbing all of Ukraine. I don't think that it would argue for such a mission. I think the global situation doesn't really make it possible because any attempts by Russia to truly steamroll, overthrow the government by its own accord, not by the dissolution of Ukrainian government could happen. But I think what Russia would probably prioritize is having the situation in Ukraine become so unstable that it leads to a political situation more favorable to Russia. I don't think that it's going to seek a political solution militarily in Ukraine, but if it has to, and if it does pursue the conflict to its logical conclusion, if it doesn't cave, which I don't think it will, to pressures for Russia to come to the table and meet Ukraine's objectives. I think that's a fantasy, and I don't think that's going to happen. So if Russia does indeed continue this conflict in the way that it is, if the collective West and the United States don't smarten up and understand what is happening in front of them, then indeed Ukraine's government could definitely fall, and it could definitely lead to a political situation more favorable to Russia. And who knows, maybe it leads to a situation where Russia is in the driver's seat in determining and deciding, not by political force, but by sheer political circumstance, the future of Ukraine's government. Dare I say, is it Ukraine? Is it a partition? What is it? We don't know yet, but it's definitely moving in this direction. Definitely moving in this direction. With that said, Sparky, thanks so much for more. Putin is a righteous man, anti-globalist hero. Thank you for this chat. Build a better world with BRICS. Yes, these are all things I agree with, even though I don't usually use the word globalist. You know, I call it global capitalism, imperialism. You know, that's what I call it. And and it's the rule of a tiny few elites at the helm of a wretched system of empire that is truly driven by profiteering. It's truly driven by profiteering, and it's driven by the dominance that is necessary to facilitate it. So BRICS is certainly a bulwark against this. Russia, Vladimir Putin, regardless of whether you agree with everything he does, which I don't. I mean, I don't agree with everything that Putin or Russia does. I do not ascribe to the Russia has 100% perfect. I don't agree with everything China does. I don't think that everyone has 100% pure government, communist, socialist, whatever. It's just impossible to have in this very moment. But what I do know is that Putin and Russia know Russia better than me. The Communist Party of China, China knows China better than me, the Chinese people. And they are going to determine their own destinies. And the BRICS countries know their countries better than I do. And it'll be up to the people to decide how they want their governments, their states, their systems to operate and what kind of system they want. They've chosen in Russia and China and in many of the BRICS countries what systems they want. Some of them are socialist, some of them are capitalist, some of them are hybrid systems, some of them are, whatever they are, right? Monarchies even. But the primary issue here is, how are these governments behaving together? How are they acting together? And it's a watershed moment when you have governments of all kinds of systems coming together to essentially bring down empire, to essentially end this era of US unipolar empire. That's what's going on. That's what I truly do support. That's where I build. That's why I am for a position of building broad unity. But we do also have to have it out. Maybe not on these platforms, but we have to have it out in whatever capacity we are working in, to come to a vision for ourselves in the collective West. And maybe it can happen on these platforms in a certain way. It's certainly something that maybe should be explored by a different channel. But this is, yeah. But someone says Sticky Bits says is sometimes appeal to moderation. He says it's not perfect. Whatever, China has a far better system. Yeah, I mean, look, this is something I agree with. China has a far better system than the United States. Far better system than the United States. Far better system than the collective West. Arguably, we could make this. We could make the argument if we want to go against moderation. Say China might have the most effective system in the world. Some may quibble. The socialists may say Cuba is more ideologically pure. Of course, anti-China folks would say anybody but China. And, there's probably a lot of different kinds of people in between. But we could argue that given China's prominence, where it came from, where it is now, how it's navigated difficult circumstances economically, how it has been able to avoid recessions, how it's been able to integrate in the global economy, yet protect itself from the worst excesses, driven by the collective West, driven by the Western dominated capitalist system. Given all of these things, given its ability to not wage wars, given its ability to build up a strong military without such a need, all these things, you could say, hey, yeah, China indeed has maybe the most effective and best system, but honestly, I don't know if it's important to label best or worst or whatever. I mean, we could call the United States the worst of the worst because it influences all the other of the worst, others of the worst. But other people would quibble. Hey, what about Israel? Hey, what about these other? The people quibble about these things, but I don't think it's necessary. I think we can talk about much more importantly where we need to be standing in solidarity. What is the reality on the ground? What are these contradictions that mean? You had in the 1970s, for example, Vietnam and China had a war, and I think both sides have errors. I think both sides of Vietnam and China. I'm really curious to learn more when I go there about the perspective on this. But I talk to people. They say, yeah, Vietnamese people, they still think Chinese people colonized them, and it's like I don't know if that's the right position from thousands of years ago, right? Especially when you come out of a revolutionary tradition. But how can I make that judgment 100%? Because I look at this from the outside. China too. Do I think China was 100% correct in that conflict? Absolutely not. I don't think either side was. I think the Cold War and all these contradictions ensured mistakes on China's foreign policy. Had a lot of issues at that time. Vietnam also, was developing its own kind of understanding and had, has a lot of there's a lot of contradictions and feelings that go back a long time between China and Vietnam. So with that said, though, does that mean that China and Vietnam can't work together? They can't better relations? They haven't bettered relations? That somehow that they're against each other? No. And that's the complex world we live in. So that's why I think it's most important to the moderate sense. I don't even call myself moderate, but if we look at things a bit more clear-headed and with an aim toward real impact, that's where I go for. That's what I go for. So thanks so much all for the super chats. I don't see any other questions. Do if you're still here, I think I'm going to wrap this up soon. I'm just going to say a few words of appreciation before I go. If you have any more questions, please do leave them, and I'll go through the chat as much as I can. With that said, though, I don't see any more questions, but please do, okay? You're liking the stream. We're good with likes. We still have 900 people here. Thank you for all the super chats. Thank you for all the viewership. Definitely hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. I'm also on Rumble. If you're on Rumble, I'm just going to send you the link to the stream there, and you can get me on Rumble, okay? Get me on Rumble. Follow me there because I just got on Rumble. I see some people in the chat on Rumble. Bricks Love, China managing 1.4 billion people. You look tired. You need to sleep. Oh, wow, I do. Yeah. You're right. Thank you. So Rumble, hit me up on there. Rockfin, I'm also on Rockfin if you're on Rockfin. I don't see any questions on Rockfin. Thank you so much for all the Rockfin chatters and viewers. But no other questions, okay? I don't see any other questions. I see some comrades in the chat from our community here still. I'm just going to say a few words about 100,000, okay? I'm just going to say just what it's like. I'll just give you an inside scoop of what it means, what it has meant to get here in terms of what's happened and who I should be appreciative of and who I should give really shout outs to. And then I'm going to go because I don't see any more questions. And so we're going to leave it there. So first off, I just want, big thank you to everybody who's made this possible. I mean, it's from everyone who's viewed here, who has been interested, who's found my work just because. A big thank you to everyone who's followed me from before I was on YouTube and I was writing articles, Black Agenda Report, other publications, writing a book on American exceptionalism up there. A big thank you to all those who've been following me because I've been an anti-imperialist, I've been a socialist, I've been a communist. I have been in that world for more than 12 years. And I've been writing for more than 10 years, and I've been on YouTube for about 4 years, but really committed to this work probably for only a couple. So, we're talking about maybe 2 years now. So I got a lot of people to thank, all right? First, I'm just going to thank people who have helped with this. First, if it wasn't for Glenn Ford, if it wasn't for the executive editor of Black Agenda Report, who, when I brought up to him that we need to be on YouTube, and him saying, okay, like that's definitely true, then I wouldn't have started this channel, because that's where it was initially supposed to go. But a lot of things happened. Glenn Ford unfortunately died. That was very sad. That was one of the saddest moments probably in my political life, because he was a big mentor of mine, and he was someone who truly, I live in this very interesting area of politics in the political sphere, where I'm not class only, I'm not race only, I'm not liberal, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a ultra leftist communist. I'm someone who tries to bring it all together so that we can understand that the reality that we live in is shaped by many forces, all dictated by a singular ruling class that, of course, has aspects multinationally and globally, but in the end, it has a very, we call it unipolar, in the sense it's led by a singular country, but there is a singular class really dictating this. There is. That's why the world order is shaped in the way that it is. And so I have to thank him first and foremost, because, it was him who first supported me doing this. And then, of course, I began, and I was already on a trajectory to be more independent. That wasn't something that was at odds with anybody. Some people have asked me. No, I was already going a more independent direction. I wrote the book independently with Roberto Servent. I was pursuing independent projects because I was coming into my own in media, independent media. This is not something I'm trained in. This is not something that I went to school for. I went to school for social work. I grew up working class. I thought I wanted to help poor people too. And so I went into social work. And then I still do that part-time. But it never really was something I could see myself as being inspired by singularly, that would maintain my fire for bettering the lives of oppressed people. That just wasn't going to happen. So, I started writing, and then, I got into this YouTube thing toward 2019, 2020, and then, of course, COVID happened. So without Glenn Ford, I got to thank him first. And then, I have to thank the people along the way that have helped me with this project. There are many people. There's a person, let's say her name was Marianne, first really inspired me by saying, hey, you need to get your YouTube graphics game up. This person couldn't help me for very long. They needed to deal with their own stuff, but I'm so grateful for them. Then there was Aloha Socialisti, who helped so much with, especially the graphics side of this project, helping with my branding, so to speak, helped me with thumbnails for so long, several months and months and months and months, until they themselves no longer could commit. They did it on a volunteer basis, 100%. Although as my project started to grow and as people started to support my work more, I tried to give as much as I could. And, I'm so grateful for them. And then, of course, I have to give a big shout out to Area 5Z, I believe is how they go on Telegram. They're with DD Geopolitics. Huge shout out. They're continuing to help me. They help with the thumbnails. They've helped me with an ending video, all of that. All of the graphics stuff now is in their realm. And, I'm grateful to be able to even give them anything at all. And that's why I try to grow this project monetarily, by the way, on Patreon, Substack, wherever you can, YouTube, all of that, because it really does, I'm trying to be fair. I'm not, this is mainly a single person project. So I'm not trying to be free labor. I don't like interns, right? If you do something for me, I want to compensate, because I think that our labor should be compensated. So I have to thank them nonetheless, DD Geopolitics as a whole on Telegram, incredible support as I've started to move on that social media platform at China Geopolitics. Definitely look me up. And of course, all the members, the paid subscribers on Patreon, Substack, YouTube, now people on Buy Me a Coffee, people who have sent me regular PayPals and not so regular PayPals, wherever you've been able to send chats, all of that, like super chats. It's been humbling to be able to build up the capacity to increase the volume of the work that I do here. And without that, I would not be able to do this to the same extent, because it keeps me with a lower volume of work outside of here, and helps me plan for these things, helps me. Now I got to upgrade equipment because I think my interface is gone. I'm not the best at this audio stuff, so I think I must have done something wrong or something. But that's that's not the extent of it, though, because a lot of my growth too has hinged on collaboration and cooperation. And I can't even name the number of people that have come on my program and given their time free. Like, I don't pay these people to come on my program. Sometimes I think I should, because they have been so generous with their time, with their energy, with their intellect, with their contributions. They've seen my work as valuable, which is to me the greatest, kind of honor, to have people who have been doing this for years. And these are not even all people that I agree with 100%, but people I've followed for years and years and years. We have some different ideological positions and politics and maybe areas of views on various things. But when it comes to critical issues of foreign policy, of empire, we are together in promoting a particular message that goes against the grain of the Western mainstream media. And so these people run the gambit. I mean, I'm just going to try to, go through them. So Margaret Kimberly, of course, who has co-hosted this program many times with me. Dr. Gerald Horne, who was just on here, who's been on here many times, an incredible historian. Brian Berletic of the New Atlas, with his incredible contributions to the realm of geopolitics. I've followed him since he was Tony Cartalucci, writing article after article after article. So he was hugely instrumental in me understanding better Asia and to really get to know that region better geopolitically. Pepe Escobar, Michael Hudson. I mean, I can go on and on. Scott Ritter. I mean, these folks have become regulars on this program. And that's not because, I don't force them on here. I ask them, hey, will you come on? And they're willing. Ben Norton, Richard Wolff, Jingjing Li, Carl Za, my good friend Carlos Martinez, who's also a good personal friend. George Galloway has been on here, Low Key, Ali Abu Nima. I'm just naming off names now because it's these folks who have given their time. Radhika Desai, John Pilger has been on this program. Jeffrey Sachs has been on this program. Claire Daly, the EU member of parliament. I mean, on and on and on. Richard Medhurst, who is going to be on October 1st, by the way, for a fun stream. Jill Stein, on and on. Vijay Prashad. I can go on and on and on and on. Special guests too. I've had Nixie Lam, who works in Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region government. Kenneth Coyle. It has been a village. It takes a village, really, for me. Like, I am not someone. This is what I hope differentiates me from others, is that my program is not meant to take. I mean, look. If you look at the titles of my videos, you could probably call that clickbait. And I will be the first to admit that. And that's only because I want YouTube to boost my videos. At the same time, my content is not to be baity. I'm not here to be inflammatory and to take positions just based on popularity. Because I do think that happens a lot on YouTube. Of course it does. Why wouldn't it? But for me, this channel was never about that. It's the reason why I collaborate so much is not because I'm trying to pilfer other people's audiences. It's because I'm trying to genuinely grow and get my own particular perspective out there based on collaboration and cooperation, rather than me, let's say, changing my worldview so that I become more popular to YouTube audiences. No, I want my worldview to be informed by what's happening in the world, what I actually believe in, and I don't want to get distracted by issues that, while they may be important to some, they're still not important. They're not as important to me, right? Like, they're just not. So I believe that my growth has been in large part due to a village of people who have viewed my work as valuable, as a worthy contribution, as worth spending time with. And I couldn't be more, and worth promoting, worth getting out there. And so I couldn't be more appreciative to all the people who have participated in that up until this point. And yeah, that's basically what I have to say about that. That's how this has happened, honestly. I put in a lot of work. It's basically a singular project, other than the assistance I get with thumbnails and brief edits to clips, and that's it. Like, I do everything else is a singular project. It is me, myself, and I. It has been one that has been driven by my passion to have people get to know the real China, the real Russia, the real multipolar world, to spread information that can help us build a real anti-war consensus among the people, a real peace consensus among the people, one that's not driven by Cold War sentiment, sectarianism, or anything like that, but one that is truly driven by a genuine understanding that true peace, true respect, true self-determination, right? These principles that you can find in the UN Charter, you can find in very mundane places like that. But when we truly adhere to them, we also can build a better understanding of ourselves, of our own particular situations. We can really bridge that contradiction, build real mass movements and united movements for true change. And, it's come with a lot of difficulties, and it hasn't always been easy to keep up this kind of work. It has sometimes been trying. It's sometimes, sorry, I'm looking at my dog. His tongue is sticking way out. Like, sorry, I got to get a picture of this. So just bear with me. I'm an obsessive dog dad, and I often can't get a picture of this because he's of course, dogs are all sensitive to noise and stuff. But when he's in a deep sleep like this, I gotta get the picture of it. Anyway, some people want me to show you. Ooh, I might be able to share screen that, but I can't. People are being very kind in the chat. But with that said, this has also taken. It's not all been like, when I say I've been uncompromising, that's not necessarily true. I have compromised to a degree, but it's not the compromising you may think. There was once a time on my channel, I think the last time I did this was when I talked about MAGA communism, where I broached subjects that were maybe more niche and more part of a different community. And those aren't topics that I don't care about anymore. I do still care about those topics to a certain degree. But I noticed that there was a certain stage in my development where I thought, man, I was getting distracted by like online phenomenon, and I was also getting distracted by like ideological discourse, which I'm an ideological person. I believe in a whole lot of things ideologically. I call myself a communist. I'll argue with people about the merits of communism, the application of socialism around the world, the superiority of that system. Like, I'll argue about that, sure. But I think I came to realize that if I'm going to do this kind of work and actually have it make a true impact, I was going to have to get out of a silo. Like, I couldn't be siloed. So I had to really dig deep and say, well, how can I maintain my political and ideological principles while also attempting to reach bigger audiences? It's not going to work all the time that other people are just going to boost your stuff. No, eventually it becomes a matter of what are you going to do to make sure that this happens to reach wider audiences. And so that's what I've tried to do. And I've also tried to do it in my messaging. Like, I'm not going to make huge arguments. I'll make arguments about why the real causes for wars on Russia and China, the real reasons why the U.S. does what it does, the anti-colonial, the socialist, all of that, the struggles that people and nations are engaged in, multipolarity, etc. And that there's an ideological component to that. But at the same time, the way I frame it has been a big part of my growth too, is that I've tried to make it more accessible. I've tried to make it more about how to move people from reading, studying information and news reports to how can they think more analytically so they can come to their own conclusions, so they can start maybe dropping some of their anti-Russia, anti-China baggage. Maybe they can become more involved in understanding these systems better. So I've seen my role more in that light on this platform. If you want to talk to me privately, we can surely get into the weeds on many other things. But here I've tried to keep it very focused, not just because focus means more success, but because I do think it is more effective in this time. I think about this strategically. And so I'm glad that strategically it's paid off in the sense that more people view my work, more people see it. That's great. And hopefully more people are impacted by it positively. So, that's basically how this has happened. It hasn't been through big backing or big sponsorships, although those have been coming in. And to be frank, I'd rather rely on support from people such as yourselves who watch this program, send me super chats, buy me a coffees, become Patreon members, because I get to give you something in return. While sponsorships, I don't want to become a big commercial. Anyone who wants to weigh in on sponsorships, reach out to me. They are rolling in. But at the same time, I've seen channels now, they're trying to make money, and I'm not gonna hate on their game. I'm not gonna say sponsorships are the devil, right? Sponsorships are against my 100% my principles. But at the same time, I don't want to get bogged down in that. So I still want to genuinely rely on your support, your ability to support me on Patreon annually. So I know I can give you something there. It won't be like a million exclusive content stuff, but it will be, opportunities for engagement, opportunities to ask questions, opportunities to suggest ideas for content, for guests, things like that, to really, give back. I want it to be more of a community. I want it to be more of a movement. I want you all to challenge me. People do challenge me. People will go up on my Patreon like, why are you talking to this person? Why are you suggesting that? Why are you not talking about this anymore? I want that, because only then can I become better at what I do in service, not for me, not for me to make money. Like, no, I want to make money so I can eat food and live in a place that is fit for human life. And certainly I would love to retire someday. All these lofty goals, right? But this is not for money. This is for building something that hopefully can make an impact on as mass a scale as possible. Albeit 100,000 subscribers is great, but in terms of mass appeal, all of our media projects in this community have a long way to go individually, but also collectively, because that's one thing I've tried to mirror by example, is we can do this collectively. And I'm not perfect at it. I even said, there was someone who gave me a super chat, JB Fawn. Certainly I have not been able to answer all interview requests and collaborate as much as I would want to with others on the other side. But those are things I want to definitely get better at. Some of that just takes time management and to let go of, all the responsibilities that I have, some of which I can't. But in any event, that's how this happened. I'm going to keep working hard for you all as best as I can. I'm going to continue to take breaks as well. And continue to make things happen, basically, as best as I can. It won't always be perfect. I'm sure, who knows? Hopefully my future here is long. That's why I didn't freak out even when my interface went out. I was like, well, if I'm going to be doing this for a while, I guess things are going to wear out. I guess things like that might go kaput. I might have to get fixed or get new things. And that's just the name of this business. With that said, everyone, Shenzhou said, if Danny were doing this for money, then he could just echo the mainstream media and get plenty of subscribers doing so. And I could do other things. I don't even have to just echo the mainstream media. Plenty of people make money too by echoing so-called alternatives, which aren't so alternative anymore. Whether you think that's for better or for worse. So thank you for those comments. It's not... Yeah, so I'm just looking at your chats before I leave here. It's getting late. Being very kind. Thank you, JB. Thank you, JB. Thank you so much. It's always heartening, I do get that from time to time. People reaching out saying I was influential at some point, at now, or back then, and it's like, wow, I feel like I've gotten old. People are saying, back in the day, you were writing about this, or you were saying that, or you went on Jimmy Dore and said this, and I'm like, whoa, I'm getting old here, because now we're talking about years ago, and I'm just like, time surely flies, everyone. Time surely flies. So, but anyway, follow JB anyway. Follow JB Fun. Follow his channel. Follow RBN, Revolutionary Blackout Network. Very good friends. Hopefully more collaboration in the future. I'm sure as the elections heat up, we're going to have to do more of that, surely. So, yeah. I think that's all, everybody. I think that's all. It's midnight. Some people say I look tired. I do need more sleep. I should get more sleep, honestly. But that's always something. If you want to know a little bit more about me, I've always had issues. I've always been a light sleeper. I've always had child of crazy. Like I have I guess you call them night terrors, but really nightmares. I'm a light sleeper, a very light sleeper. And I try to sleep. I don't, I wouldn't say I have insomnia necessarily, but there are moments. I do. So I try to be good. But let's say COVID, that whole lifestyle change, woof, that was rough. That's sensory deprivation. I'm a student of solitary confinement, so I will never. I thought there were some people making comparisons to solitary confinement. I wanted to blow my brains out when I heard people say that. I was like, get the hell out of here. You're not going to do solitary confinement just because you're being told not to go outside and socialize or whatever. But it does have an impact. Any level of sensory deprivation has an impact when it's consistent and prolonged, and of course not to your benefits. So but it's not solitary confinement. Let's be real here. That's torture. It's a weapon of war. U.S. prison system uses it like it's standard practice. But at the same time, that COVID has a huge impact, man. Like, that life. I was in New York, man. Like, whew. Nobody was seeing each other. People were scared of leaving their apartments. It was a disastrous time. And so that changed my, or at least accelerated my difficulties with sleeping. So, it's been a long journey trying to whittle that, go against the grain with that. But, there's been also just many changes in my life. My wife works overnights. I don't. It's, it's a constant adjustment. And I think the vast majority in the collective West, especially in the United States, sleep issues in the United States. I don't think I know anybody. I think the vast majority of people I'm close to have sleep issues. My wife doesn't have them. She's a lucky one. She can sleep. She can sleep during the days after night shifts. Although I'll be very empathetic to her. She does not get to sleep well because the graveyard shift is just terrible for you. So she doesn't sleep like a lot, but she can sleep. If I wouldn't last a minute on a grave shift because I am too sensitive. Like my body would be wired again. When I was in China, when I'm going to Vietnam, I'm not even looking forward to that part of it. It's like that part of it is actually really rough for me because I'm someone with I'm a lot of adrenaline, a lot of energy. Even though I don't have bipolar disorder, I was raised by someone who has bipolar disorder. So let's just say it's in the genes to have a intense, like high energy. Not even like, oh, I'm everywhere, I'm jittery, I'm like blah blah blah. No. It's more so just like I can go for a long time. Like I can push my body for a while. So it takes a lot out of me when I travel because it's like I'll be exhausted on the one hand, but my body's like, psych, you can have that jet lag, but also just be awake and never sleep and never fall asleep, and then you try to fall asleep, and so yeah, it's a struggle. Someone said, this is great. Mikhail said, too much screen time makes it hard to sleep. Not enough screen time leaves you out of the loop. Indeed. So, everybody, I gotta go. All right. Thank you so much for all your contributions. The generous super chats, so many. Rob asked, does it feel like a growing coherence? Does it feel like a coherence is growing in spite of everyone being under surveillance? In some ways, yes. I do think the fact that so many people have been paying attention to alternative sources of information on Ukraine, the fact that the Western mainstream media is even having a hard time reporting on certain things with out-and-out lies. I think the fact that public opinion has shifted in so many positive and negative ways shows that people are, I think, becoming more and more engaged. I do think that there is still a lot of incoherency, especially around foreign policy and what's happening around the world, and also what happens in people's respective countries in the collective West. But I do think that, did I ever think someone like myself could have had a channel like the one I have now? No. So if I'm any kind of marker, which I don't think I really am, but I do think solely, but I do think that there's a lot of similarities to how people are searching and really starving for truth. Younger people are, even older people. Yeah, all people of all stripes are searching hard for truth, and I do think that has made a big difference. And crises breed and really develop resistance. They really develop opposition. They develop movements. It is in crisis where things really change. And so I think we are feeling the rudiments of hopefully what will be more uprisings in the collective West against this suicidal machinery that we live under, right? Like this suicidal, super exploitative, murderous machinery. Thank you, Jeffrey Long, for that super sticker as well. So anyway, all right, everybody, as I get out of here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. go to the links in the video description for my Patreon account, which is the best place to support me. Lots of good perks there. I always say I'm gonna get audio of all my videos up there, and then it takes a lot of labor out of me to do that. So you will get that, but you will also get a free PDF copy of my book. You will also get the ability to suggest questions, ask questions, suggest guests, content, etc. You'll also get first notifications. You will get various updates, information you might not get anywhere else. A whole lot of cool things on Patreon. Substack, YouTube membership have similar perks, but unfortunately the platforms don't allow for the same kind of range and flexibility. But Substack is also a great place to get archives of my articles when you become a paid member. And YouTube membership is just a great place to support just this channel. And you get first dibs on notifications as well as other perks as I can. And of course, buy me a coffee, PayPal, all of those things are there as well. All right. So with that said, everybody, I spent a lot of time here. Thanks for celebrating with me. 100,000 is great, and we are going to continue to grow as fast as possible. All right. And we're going to continue to hopefully build a better world. Good night or good morning, wherever you are. Thanks for all who viewed today, and I will see you tomorrow night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern with Scott Ritter. Bye-bye.